today on Beyond 6 Seconds.
You can't really deny who you really are. Like, you can't shrink yourself for the comfort or expectations of others, because eventually it's going to explode. Eventually you're going to have to deal with, this is actually who I am and this is what I want to do with my life. This is what makes me happy.
Welcome to Beyond 6 Seconds, the podcast that goes beyond the 6-second first impression to share the extraordinary stories and achievements of everyday people. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel. Welcome to a brand new year of Beyond 6 Seconds. I'm so grateful to have you as a listener, and I'm so excited to bring you a whole host of inspiring episodes this year. And I've got some new things planned throughout the year just for my listeners like you. The first thing is that I will be launching a brand new newsletter. It'll have all kinds of information about the episodes that are coming up, some behind the scenes things, some additional insights from my guests. So if you would like to become a Beyond 6 Seconds insider and get our newsletter, then please head over to my website, www.beyond6seconds.com, and go to the header on the top of the page that says sign up for my newsletter. And as a special thank you, as soon as you sign up, you'll get the opportunity to download my free checklist for getting started with podcasting. Thank you for listening today. And now here's our very first episode of 2020. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Ginni Saraswati. Ginni is an award-winning journalist and celebrity interviewer, known to stun many a personality with her quick-witted introductions and on-air antics. She's the founder of Ginni Media, a boutique podcast production company, and the host of the podcast, The Ginni Show. Ginni, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Carolyn. I'm super excited to spend beyond 6 seconds with you.
Very good. And I'm so excited to go beyond 6 seconds with you as well. So as I am a podcaster, I am always curious and interested to learn about the podcasting journeys of other podcasters. So I'd love to learn more about The Ginni Show. Now, it looks like you launched it back in 2016 and it's going on 3 years now. What first inspired you to create your own podcast back in 2016?
Well, it's an interesting question, Carolyn. I think me creating my own podcast was a consequence of being on radio for so long. I think that was kind of the natural shift the medium was going into, because I was on doing radio, a variety of shows from daytime to morning to breakfast to evening when I started. And what I noticed when the iPod came out, when we were doing a morning show, was a lot of our listeners, or a lot of the traffic that we were getting, was actually from download. So it meant that people were listening not live, but in their own time. So in my head, when I wrapped up my last breakfast show, I thought, I think podcasting is the next step for me. And it seemed to be the natural step for me. And it was also a way that I could be myself in a way that I couldn't be on radio. Not that radio ever blocked me from being myself. I was myself, but I was able to explore and unpack more discussions and more parts of what I wanted to explore about life. So that's kind of a long answer to how I got to the podcast, Carolyn.
I see. And so you were also able to kind of see the trend coming of podcasting, which is now, certainly this year, really starting to get the attention of the general public in terms of critical mass and listenership. But even just a couple of years ago, I know in 2016, I probably wasn't even thinking about podcasts, but you were really seeing that trend. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I think for me too, it just was, I loved creating content and I loved talking to people. I could talk to people for ages, and it just seemed to be a natural progression. And I think now with podcasting in particular, it's kind of like a thing now. You go to college, you pick your degree, and then you start a podcast. It's kind of a life path or a life choice now. But I think the cool thing about podcasting is it's such a great medium of information, a way to consume information or any form of content while you're actually doing something else. And it's the only kind of medium that allows you to do that, being audio-based. When you're watching a video or reading something, you have to give that piece of content your full and undivided attention. But audio is the only kind of medium that allows you to multitask and easily fits into your schedule. So I think that is a huge, huge player in the fact that podcasting has become so popular.
Yeah, I think I read an article recently that most listeners do multitask when they're listening to podcasts, whether they're cleaning the house or driving or doing something else. So that's spot on. Good.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned that your interest in podcasting grew out of your career and all of the work that you did in radio. So tell me, how did you develop an interest in being an on-air personality on the radio?
The thing is, when I was in university, Carolyn, I studied theatre. So I was doing performing arts. I was also doing a bit of journalism and writing as well. But I felt very comfortable on stage playing a different character. But, in a contradiction, getting behind the microphone, I was a little bit nervous about, because I'm like, well, I can't play a character on air because it's such an intimate medium. And when you play a character, when you put on your radio voice, it's very obvious that I'm being authentic. And that was some of the coaching that I got when I first started. Like, a lot of the program directors are like, you need to tone down your radio voice. You don't need to sound like you're on the radio. And that's what I thought I needed to sound like. And I think that came from, a combination of my training as an actor, and also just because I was nervous, because I'm like, I don't know if I want to be myself behind the microphone. So I guess that's kind of what made me join radio, was the fact that they were offering a course, this particular radio station called Joy 94.9. They were offering a free course in radio training. And because I was doing, training in performing arts, I was doing some training in TV and film as well. I thought, well, why don't you just check out radio to see how you feel? And I really, really loved it. Even though I was super nervous, I scripted my entire first 2-hour show, or probably the first 10 2-hour shows.
Wow.
I was super happy to be behind the mic, and it's a great medium to connect with people and to meet people from around the world. Just like what we're doing now, Carolyn, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation had it not been for the concept of audio or radio or podcasting. It's such a beautiful medium.
Exactly. Yeah, it really helps you connect with people all around the world that you would never have the opportunity probably to reach and to get into their headphones and into their ears. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's see. I know here in the States, sometimes it can be a bit of a challenge to get into radio. And, I'm from the States, I'm from New Jersey. And I'm guessing from your accent that you are not from New Jersey like me. So tell me about just a little guess. So tell me about where you got into radio and what it was like and what that looked like.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, I'm not from New Jersey. So that was a very accurate observation there, Carolyn. I'm originally from Sri Lanka. I was born there, hence why I look the way that I do. But we moved to Australia when I was 2, hence the adorable accent. In the Australian market, there's 3 kind of sectors of radio, if you want a full tutorial and textbook definition. You've got the public sector, you've got the commercial sector, and you've got the community sector. So community radio is where the government gives you free licensing to service a particular community need. So Joy 94.9 was a community radio station, and it was an LGBTIQ radio station. And I believe it's only like one of 2 in the world.
Wow.
So it's a pretty special station, and it always has a very special place in my heart. And the objective of that station is to serve the LGBTIQ community with relevant news, information, entertainment, anything kind of topical and relevant to inform that community moving forward, as was any other community radio station. So that's where that space was. So community radio, I found, is a great launch pad for commercial talent. So a lot of people that I know started off who went through, commercial radio, where you get the primetime spots of breakfast drive or morning shows or, evening shifts. Some of them did start in community radio. It's a great kind of platform to get you comfortable behind the mic, that platform where you get to meet different people, reach out to publicity teams and media networks. You get to really form a contact base, and community radio is great for that. Commercial radio, I find in Australia at the moment, I find a lot of the talent is being recruited for their celebrity clout over their actual ability to radio announce. And I don't mean that in any disrespect to the talent on air. They're called talent for a reason, but their talents may not necessarily be in the ability to present a radio program. It may be because they have such an engaging way of drawing people in, if that makes sense. So I think that's kind of what I've noticed. The trend is like, there's someone who's got a big following who comes on radio, and that, helps the network drive up their numbers and therefore drive up their advertising rates and that kind of thing. So I think it's very much an influence game, as it kind of is when you look at everything else now, when you look at influencer marketing online and that sort of thing. Where attention is, that's where people go, and that's, as a consequence, advertisers go too. So it's kind of been a more, I guess, it's just happening quicker in various forms. So I guess it's a very long-winded answer as to what radio looks like in Australia. But I think the other sector I didn't cover was public radio, which was like your Australian Broadcasting Corporation or your Special Broadcasting Service, which had like specialized programming for a certain like independent films or foreign films, and the ABC kind of did more local stuff. So it's kind of the 3 different sectors there, Carol, and I hope that gives you a snapshot as to what Australia looks like.
It does. Yeah, that's helpful. And it's great to know that for the community radio that can be a great springboard to other opportunities, whether they're in radio or other parts of media and entertainment. You know, you worked for a particular radio station. How did you find that station? Did you know about it and say, I want to audition, I want to be on this particular station? Or were you trying out for different things when you were trying to break into radio?
Oh, well, when I actually applied for the course that they were teaching, which was a Certificate 3 in radio broadcasting, I I actually ticked every box on the application that said, what do you want to do with this degree? And I put like admin, producer, cleaning, whatever I could just to get into the station and learn. But I did not want to be on air because, again, I felt really uncomfortable being myself around the mic. But, as I love talking to people, what I didn't realize back then, because I didn't have much self-awareness back then, but I love connecting with people who are like me. And, as a fellow member of the LGBTIQ community, that was really a space where I felt safe to be myself. And that was what naturally unfolded. And one of the program directors pulled me aside at the time saying, hey, I want you to do the 11 to 1 a.m. shift on Monday nights. I said, no, I'm not doing that. She's like, no, there's too much personality there. We need to let that get out. And I'm very grateful for her to have done that in the past. She really did push me outside my comfort zone in that time. And I was able to kind of figure it out because I think sometimes we're so scared of jumping into the unknown. Sometimes you just need someone to nudge us to kind of take the first step or stumble into the first step, which is kind of what happened to me. And I guess for me, now that I know that's how I operate, I'm a stumbling student. I always stumble forward. I might fall, but I'm moving forward. That's how I got into the radio behind the mic. And then from there, I did a variety of shows, got promoted from the graveyard shift to an afternoon show. Then I did a drive show. And then ultimately I ended up on the morning show for 10 years on and off.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's great. I think in a lot of our careers, we really need those people who recognize our talent and sometimes can see our potential before we can. They just see something in there that spark and give us that opportunity. So that is really wonderful.
Absolutely.
You became an on-air talent despite originally not wanting to go that route, and that you obviously had quite a talent for it. But in addition to that, you also have a talent for comedy as well. So how did you discover not only that you were good on air, but that you were actually funny on air too?
I find nowadays, Carolyn, that the comedic part is quite subjective. But I guess for me, my comedic sense started with, I guess, a form of imitation, which is a form of flattery, as people say, of my family, my many aunties and my many, many cousins, which I continue to joke about. I think that's kind of where it started. I was like, my family is pretty funny in all their craziness and all their how big they are. It's just a funny, funny family. I think that's what inspired me to, I guess, in the form of imitation, masquerade as a podcast for a year or two when I started putting out that content. So the way I approach things, the intention I have is to provide value and to leave a person laughing or leave a person feeling different before we started that conversation. When I had a morning show, one of the things that I would intend was I'd love to make 5 people laugh that day. Now, I never really knew if it was 5 people. I never really knew if it was 1 or 2 people. But if I made 2 people laugh in studio, being my co-host and the producer, I made 2 people laugh, I'd hope 3 other people would be laughing, because what happens is it sets the mood for their day, because it's a morning show, right? And how you start your day very much does play a huge part in how the rest of your day goes. And, the way that I thought was, okay, if I can make these handful of people laugh, hopefully they could use some of this joy and lightness to pass the light or the torch on to someone else. As cheesy as it sounds, that's kind of the very simple vision that I had every day when I opened the mic up and did the radio show. And I had that kind of intention when I did the podcast as well. So I think naturally comedy would play a part in that, because obviously making people laugh, it's a gift. If I ever get up to a status where I can do stand-up, it'd be great. But at the moment, I think I just got to spend all the jokes that I have on my aunties, Carolyn, and until they run out, I might need to find another family that I can make fun of.
Yeah, I mean, I was checking out some of the early episodes of the Ginni Show back in 2016, where you talk about your family and your aunties, and you mention your 170 cousins. And I'm like, well, I think she might be exaggerating for comedic effect. And then I started listening. I'm like, I don't think she's exaggerating. I think there might be 170.
There's a lot of cousins.
Wow. Yeah. Big, big family. And I know you talk about that certainly in in your podcast when you first started it out. So the Ginni Show podcast has been on for a couple of years now, and it seems like it's gone through a bit of an evolution over the years. So tell me about, how and why you started out with the particular themes and how it evolved.
That's a great question, Carolyn. And I love that you've been so perceptive and done your research in listening to how it was and to how it has evolved into now. So when I started the Ginni Show, the intent was to obviously, make people laugh, but also in a way to teach people through comedy. I find that, and as cheesy as this may sound, I've found this to ring true, that people are often more receptive to what you have to say when they're in a more relaxed, open, and I guess positive state. And laughter does elicit that from human beings. When we're laughing, when we're happy, we're more open and responsive and also willing to hear and receive things. So when I started the Ginni Show, it was to educate or to serve through comedy. That kind of was the first intention. And I think there's a lot of time that was going into scripting the shows, doing the sound effects. It was a lot of time on my part. And when I started the Ginni Show, I was working a day job. So it wasn't, I could sustain the fact that, I did the day job during the week, but then I'd come up with the Ginni Show. I'd write the script, record it, send it to my producer. Then he'd, magically put it together and then send it back and it'd be a podcast episode. But what I found after moving to New York City in 2017, doing the scripting side, I just simply didn't have the time to do it. In 2020, I want to cultivate the time to do that because I did really enjoy it. However, I found that the conversations I was having with people, even though it wasn't the straight up making fun of my aunties or family or how I grew up and to educate through that, what I did was I was able to connect with people on a level and, talk about their happiness mindset. How did they get to where they are in their life? What is their definition of happiness? Because everyone's definition is going to be different. Mine is going to be very different to yours, Carolyn, as is the next person. Happiness could be as simple as I get to have coffee every day or I get to wake up alive every day. It's very, very different for everyone. Some people see it as a destination. Some people have attachments around happiness. So I thought to myself, how can I make this, and this is a very muddy word here, scalable with time and also be able to continually put out content. So I went daily for a period of time last year, which was crazy.
Oh, man.
But we managed to go daily. And unfortunately, I couldn't sustain the daily comedy. So that's kind of where it transitioned into an interview-based, expert-based show. But I do hope to bring back the comedy tales one day, Carolyn. So, it makes me very happy to have this conversation with you.
That's great. Yeah, and I think it's great when podcasters feel and embrace the creative freedom to evolve their shows, because I know sometimes people start out with something and, from myself and for other podcasters, sometimes it's like, oh, we have to get it perfect and we have to get the perfect idea right from the start. And then what do we do if it doesn't work? It's like, so change it. Like if it doesn't work for you or your audience or you want to try something different. I mean, that's the great part about podcasting. It's like literally it's your own show. You can try new things. You can do whatever you want. And it's pretty freeing.
Good. Exactly.
We were talking a bit about your story, which you wound into the early episodes of the Ginni Show. And you mentioned earlier that you're originally from Sri Lanka and that you moved to Australia at a pretty young age. That's, I'd imagine, a big culture shock. What was that transition like for you?
It was a big culture shock. I think a part of me was swimming in the sea of blissful ignorance because I was so young, because I was 2. But I remember the feeling, and even though there aren't vivid, detailed memories to the T that I could recall, I do remember feeling like, why am I so different from everyone else? Like the way that I looked was so different from everyone else. And I remember one kid asked me why I was brown and I couldn't give him a sufficient answer because I'm like, well, Beyonce's not around. She didn't have that song, I Woke Up Like This. If that was around, I could have said that. But, I didn't have that ammo on me. And I think it was a big culture shock because, with migrating from Sri Lanka to Australia, obviously any family that's migrated to a new country goes with the intention of, we want to do better, or we want to, that's probably a very poor way of saying it, but we want to enhance the lives of ourselves that we couldn't have the opportunity to do back where we grew up. That's essentially the feeling that a lot of families that migrate have. And I think my mum and my dad, when they migrated here, they were like, all right, there's great education in Australia. There's great facilities and resources for the girls. This will be a great time to migrate, because my mother's family was starting to migrate as well. And also the civil war was starting to pick up in Sri Lanka, which went for a long time as well. So it was a bit of a cultural shock, especially the whole expectations around this is a very linear lifestyle that you're going to lead. You're going to go to school, get great grades, become a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. You end up married to a nice Sri Lankan boy who's preferably Catholic. You're going to have children. You're going to buy a house. You'll probably buy a house before you get married, that kind of thing, or when you get married. And then, it's provide and serve for your children and repeat. That was kind of the mentality. And I think it's kind of, for me, what I found is a lot of my values were colored by what I was experiencing in Australia. And Australia's culture is somewhat different to Sri Lanka, even though there's lots of Sri Lankans in Australia. And I believe Melbourne is the most populated city of Sri Lankans outside of Colombo, which is our capital. It's just super, super interesting for me when I was growing up, like the different kind of, some people have boyfriends at 15. You don't talk about that. If they have a boyfriend at 15 and they have another one at 18, this girl is promiscuous. It's just certain things like that. I'm like, okay, this seemed to be the normal in Australia, but yet it was being condemned by, cultural expectations. So there are a few nuances growing up, which I thought, I don't know if I quite fit into that linear mold, which is expected of me in a way. But one thing I am so grateful for about my mother, even though there's certain things about me that clearly wasn't linear, because, my sister married the nice Sri Lankan boy. She went on to be a bank manager. So she kind of ruined things for me in that way. I kind of came in, I'm the gay daughter who does podcast production for a living. So, that's not quite the vision that was in mind for me. But I think what it does teach you is sometimes, and as cheesy as this sounds, I know I've dropped a few cheesy lines here, Carolyn, is that you can't really deny who you really are. Like, you can't shrink yourself for the comfort or expectations of others, because eventually it's going to explode. Eventually you're going to have to deal with, this is actually who I am and this is what I want to do with my life. This is what makes me happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a challenge as a young person growing up to have that, as a conflict or, challenges between the culture that your family is part of, that you're growing up in, versus the culture that you're now living in Australia, when the expectations and things are just so different. Yeah, I can imagine it's hard to reconcile that. So how did your family and your aunties and your 170 cousins react when you kind of started to deviate from the path? Were they supportive? Were they confused? Like, what were they thinking?
I think another thing about my family, I don't know if this is particular to all Sri Lankan families, but my family in particular, if something happens, they tend to gossip about it behind your back and they'll infer it when they see you. So me being gay, it came out on a radio. Apparently they were watching a TV show that I used to be on Monday nights in Melbourne that I was hosting a segment on. And it was a LGBT program. It was called Bent TV. I hosted a segment here and there on the show. My aunt and uncle were watching it, and I never said this because I don't actually have anything of me declaring this publicly, because I believe that I'd like to work towards a post-coming out world where you don't necessarily need to declare who you love. It can just be, I declare it, like, it can just be like, I've just fallen in love and it happens to be a man or a woman or what, non-binary person, whatever it may be. But my aunt and uncle were watching Bent TV, which still remains a mystery as to why they were watching a gay program.
Just thinking on Monday
night, because they kind of went, Ginni's gay. It's like, well, why were you watching a gay program?
Yeah.
But that's still a mystery unsolved, Carolyn. But I think what happened was they saw that. Apparently I said, my name is Ginni and I'm gay. And that's when the phone calls started happening. Oh, did you know Ginni's gay? And it just kept going and going and going. And, one of my cousins, when we caught up at Christmas, said, what happened that day? Like, my dad picked up the call and, Auntie was on the phone. She's like, did you know Virginia's gay? And he's like, okay, it's not really a big deal. So he was particularly supportive. He pulled me aside saying, listen, whoever you want to bring home, please don't stop coming over, because, you have fallen in love with someone. We'd like to invite her home too. So it was just really positive from him. But some other family members, it's kind of like we're not going to talk about it, but we know type thing. So, eventually when I do bring my partner home, I think that's when they'll be like, Vella, gay people are just like us. That eventually we'll get there. That is the vision that I hold.
I see.
That was, I think, the biggest thing for them to kind of adjust to or still be adjusting to. I think my wanting to move to New York and leave a day job and run my own business, I think they've spoken very kindly to me about that. So I think that aspect, I think they've adjusted to well. But I think the gay thing, as they would call it, is still a work in progress.
Yeah. That's especially great that your father was so supportive, because that's big, that's huge. And I think the rest of the family will come around, as you said, once they meet your future partner. And but it's great you have that foundation with your dad being so supportive. So you have had a great career on the radio. And through that, and also through your podcast, you've interviewed a lot of really amazing people, even a lot of celebrities whose names we would all know and recognize. And I'd love to talk a little bit about interviewing and guests. So, tell me about the first time you interviewed a celebrity, however you define that. And where was it? How did it happen? How did you feel? What was it like?
That's a great question, because it seems like that was so long ago. But I do remember, I believe the first celebrity, quote unquote, that I interviewed was, I don't know if you remember this singer. She was really popular in the late 90s, early 2000s. Her name was Anastasia.
Oh,
she sang a song called I'm Out of Love, Set Me Free, I'm Not That Kind of Girl. She had a few hits at the time. I remember we were given an opportunity to interview her, and this was on the phone. And I'm like, oh my God, I literally brought her single when I was, 10 years ago, I bought this lady's single. She's amazing. And I remember going, oh my gosh, what are we going to say? And my co-host at the time, Adam Barrelay, was like, let's do some prep. He had a really good way of creatively getting the guest comfortable. He's a great visionary, and I'm very blessed to have connected with him. What he used to do was he used to get the entire back catalog of a particular singer or celebrity singer that we'd be interviewing, and he would turn that into an introduction. So that's exactly how we would warm the guest up, which was something that he started, which was absolute genius, because when the guest would hear their songs appear in just our random gibberish conversation, she just eased up really, really well. And Anastasia's response was like, wow, this is amazing. Almost all the guests that we had that we did that for were like, their response was really taken aback. It was very original. And it's something that we felt the intention of putting that out is this guest is going to remember us. Whether they might not remember our names, they will remember going, oh, that was the two people who did this for us. And that was what was really awesome about that. But I remember being really nervous. And I remember when we were doing the prep, our intent really was, let's just give Anastasia something different. Let's just try and talk about certain things. And I think the way it translated was we kind of did an original introduction, but we did a little bit of what you call a press release interview. We're like, we're so nervous, let's just stick to the press release. But eventually, as time went on, when we interviewed various people, we kind of moved to other things that were off what we were told to do, obviously within permission and that kind of thing. But it's something to get used to, especially if you're interviewing your heroes. Like for me, when I interviewed Jennifer Beals or when I interviewed Ruby Rose, it was a little bit nerve-wracking for me. I'm like, oh, wow, these are pretty big icons in our community. Yeah. But I think the more that you relax and know that you're talking to another human being who's had an extraordinary experience, I think the easier it is to relate to them and easier it is to have a smoother conversation.
Definitely. And it sounds like the creative intro that you did for Anastasia really helped put her at ease. And that's a formula that you've used a couple of times. And that's, a really creative way to set the mood and relax people and get started on the right foot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you did that with Paula Abdul as well, because I think I saw that clip, and she had quite a reaction to that when she realized what was going on with the intro.
Yeah, I have to say, she was an absolute hoot. I loved interviewing her, and I think for her, she's like, oh, are they talking to me? Oh, they have. It's the moment when they realize, hang on, these are my songs that they're talking about, which is priceless for me. And for Paula, it obviously came, and her reaction was priceless. I think for me too, when we were reading that, I was reading that on my phone. I just wanted to make it look as casual as possible. And Adam, he was reading it off his phone too. So we both were kind of making it look as like a casual conversation. And that was priceless. It's a great way to get, I guess, warm up your guests. But, that's just one tactic. You could do other things like, I'm baffled, but something that is so unique about them or something that they've created, if you make that into something or you play a game with them to do with that, it's pretty awesome.
Definitely. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes to that clip of you interviewing Paula Abdul so that our listeners can see exactly what happened. You've interviewed so many different kinds of people. Who are your favorite kinds of guests to interview?
Oh, this is a great question, Carolyn. I love guests who are willing to just be, and this sounds, again, cliched, but are willing to kind of just have fun and go with it. I think naturally, when you go into interviewing someone or when a guest is coming to do media or whatnot, obviously there's things that, you can kind of reasonably gauge are not appropriate to talk about. And I think having that kind of trust with someone, okay, you're not going to go there, but also saying to them, hey, if we go somewhere you're not comfortable with, happy for you to pass on that. I think it's the guest who's willing to be as open as they can and also willing to have fun. I think, sometimes it's not just about promoting your new thing that has coming up. I think people want to see that human side of you. People can see the movie that you're in or people can see the TV show you're about to be in, but getting to see the human side of you, what makes you tick, what makes you laugh, how do you take your coffee in the morning? Do you go for a run in the morning or do you procrastinate like everyone else? Those are the things that people relate to, and they're the kind of guests that I love chatting to, people who are just doing their thing in the best way that they can. And, we all connect through the human experience that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And those are the kind of guests that I like to interview as well. I'm all about the human experience and just having people tell stories. And I'm always amazed when people say, sometimes they'll tell me before they come on, like, oh, I don't really know how interesting this story is or if anyone wants to hear about my experience and such. But that's literally all I want to hear about. I want to hear about your experiences. That's just so fascinating because it's unique to you, but anyone who's listening can take away something. They can learn something from what you've been to and understand what you've learned. So I think it's really valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, wow. So you have been doing the Ginni Show for, I guess, going on about 3 years or so. You've been running Ginni Media for several years. Looking forward, what goals do you have both for Ginni Media and for the Ginni Show?
Ginni Media at the moment, this is our second full year in business. It will be the third by January. I'm really excited about Ginni Media because I think the vision I have for the company is to be a leader in podcast production and content repurposing. That's the vision that we're working towards. And, we also want to be like a one-stop shop solution for, anyone who wants to do a podcast. I think when you're starting to build a business, it's almost like, I read a quote the other day. It's like getting on a lion and you're like, is this lion going to eat me? Is it going to, run really fast? Am I going to fall off? Is this lion going to run over me? Is this lion going to take me to Pride Rock? And are we going to have a Lion King experience? Like, you don't really know. Right. You kind of just have to grip onto dear life and see where it goes. And, I love the team that we have at Ginni Media. I think, we're developing, the way I see it is we're developing leaders in the team, and I work very hard in developing my own leadership skills to make sure that I'm bringing as much value as I can and I'm being effective in how I provide that value to build that leadership team. My ideal dream, Carolyn, is for Ginni Media to be able to ultimately be the machine that we run all podcasts through. And even with my own content, like the Ginni Show or anything that I will be doing in future, I'd love for that content to go through the machine that we've created as efficiently and effectively as possible.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I could see it definitely hosting and producing all kinds of different shows. And I think you're well on your way with that. Fantastic. Wow.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Yeah. So, Ginni, thank you so much for being on my show and sharing your story. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your podcasts and all the other work that you're working on?
Absolutely. So you can reach me at The Ginni Show. I'm on at The Ginni Show on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat. Would love to hear from you. I respond to all the messages there. So please do hit me up if you'd like to be a guest or if you'd like to come on the show and have a chat. I'd love to speak to you as well. And if you want to hear more about Ginni Media, ginnimedia.com is the best place to go to look at what we have to offer in podcast production. There's a ton of freebies there as well, including ebooks, resources, and also a free course as well on how to start a podcast.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay, so I'll put those links in the show notes as well so people can find them there. Awesome.
Fantastic.
Good. Well, Ginni, thanks again. And as we're closing out the show, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know or anything else that they can help or support you with?
If I could bring anyone any value, whether it be with podcasting or how to interview guests, please feel free to reach out to me on any of those platforms. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ginni. It was great to talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Great to talk to you too.
Thanks for listening to Beyond 6 Seconds. Please help us spread the word about this podcast. Share it with a friend. Give us a shout out on your social media or write a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player. You can find all of our episodes on our website, www.beyond6seconds.com. Until next time.